Okay, so I lied. I am making another Armored Core 6 video, and this is it. I've been putting off making this video for about a week now, even though I've had all the footage and known exactly what I was going to say about basically everything. So here it is. It's the Cassowary. It's the mech I made to try and find a use for the KASUAR legs and their incredibly long jump. So the long and short of it is, yes, I did do some duels. I did get into it. And I was actually enjoying most of my time that I spent doing these 1v1s. The current meta, despite things like Bwertzel abuse and the usual missile boat shenanigans, things that we all know are, not fun to fight against necessarily, despite all of that, the game is pretty fun. You also don't have to do exclusively duels. You could go off and do a bunch of 3v3s if you want. You don't even really have to interact with the missile boats in a 1v1 environment at all if you don't want to. You have the option to scan your opponent's build before you even enter the match. You don't have to be in an arena that you don't ever want to. The lobby system is kind of good in that way. If you don't want someone carpet bombing you by flying with the assault boost from one end of wall sector to the other end, then you don't have to. You don't have to play on wall sector. Before I say anything else, I need to mention that basically all of this footage is from the previous patch, like 1.03. So this is even before the KASUAR legs were buffed. I do find myself in this trend of using things that eventually end up getting buffed, so maybe I'm just bad at telling what options are good. That or I'm so poisoned by Elden Ring and trying to find things that are a little off the wall that I just end up doing shit like this all the time. I'm going to do something a little unusual for the channel, and I'm going to show my work here, and I'm gonna go through each part individually and just kind of explain why I'm choosing it. Okay, so first off we have the Ransetsus, and the Ransetsu is good in this patch. It is going to continue to be good into 1.04, but it does great stagger. It has good damage even when your opponent is not yet staggered. It's great. I'm using the ETSUJIN on the left hand because it is not a Balaam weapon. It's actually comparably good compared to the Ludlow for like rapid fire options. These active homing missiles are really strong. The two homing missiles is what you usually see, but I'm using a very finely tuned one because of the decreased lock-on time and the faster reload time. Plasma missiles in general are very good. The vertical launch ones I think are technically the best, but I like how cheap and effective the basic 3 plasma missiles can be on essentially any build. KASUAR head to match our KASUAR legs. KASUAR means cassowary in German, and we're using it because of its very high attitude stability, even across the board. Same for the FIRMEZA. The energy reload on the core is a little iffy, so sometimes I think about using the ALBA. For the most part, I used the FIRMEZA for its higher stability and lightweight. The MELANDER arms were a more recent change. I more frequently used the Nachtreicher arms for the target tracking. As you can see, with the Balaam arms, we have a very nice recoil control, and then with the Nachtreicher arms, the target tracking goes up to 104, which is to say 104% target tracking. Then we have the stars of the show, the KASUAR legs. They are tremendously bad at literally everything except for their long jump. Lowest attitude stability in the game, extremely low defensive stats, but boy does it have a jump. And that jump will shape how we play. As long as we can stay grounded and go for zigzagging motions to throw off the enemy FCS with our ALULA booster here, we can succeed. We're using ALULA because it's Schneider brand and because it is very good on the quick boosts. And then for the FCS, I like the 80% target assist at the mid-range, so I do tend to stick to this FCS here. The ones with better missile tracking aren't entirely worth it, and will be bad for our kinetic weapons. The generator I jumped around on a lot. I was using the Hokushi for a while because Steel Haze uses it, and Steel Haze Ortis also uses it. although I wasn't necessarily basing this build on either of those. I like the weight to energy output ratio that both of these can give me, as well as the fast regen time, although my core is interfering with our energy regeneration to a degree. The energy recharge delay doesn't have to be that great because we do have quite a bit of time between jumps for that to initiate. It just has to be good enough that it will start up by the time I hit the ground, or near enough to that time. So in some of these clips, you will see the combustion generator color on my booster, and in some clips you'll see the blue circulating current generator color. I'm still undecided as to which is better. And then for my core expansion, I went with pulse armor. I know that terminal armor might be better for something with this low of attitude stability, but I really did find that the defensive power of the pulse armor was a lot stronger. The trick to the pulse armor is waiting until your stagger bar is about 50% full, and then using it. With this little AP and these defensive stats, if you've already been staggered, it might as well be too late. You're basically dead already. And if you had terminal armor, that would be fine. This is at its core a double trigger build, despite my attempts to not make a double trigger build. Again, it's that godforsaken trainer AC in the one training module that I have made and replicated through painstaking observation, but I've not made a video on that yet. Maybe I will make one about the 3 trainer ACs. I'm not really crazy about the tetrapod trainer particularly. It's just not very interesting. It's just got some missiles and like a grenade launcher and I think a Curtis. I digress. The Cassowary strategy is very simple. Boost around on the ground to get away from your opponent into your max range, which is like 229 meters or units, whatever we're using for distance here. And anything beyond that is garbage, and anything closer than that is extremely dangerous. Okay, now you're in your optimal range. You're in your 131 to 229 optimal firing distance. You are holding down the left trigger, and you are mashing the right trigger to get as much DPS into your opponent as possible. And at the same time, you're trying to coordinate this with your very slow active homing missile and using your plasma missiles on cooldown to try and get the tiniest bit more stagger onto your opponent. And then once they're staggered, optimally, you should kick them. But for some reason, incorporating the kick was well beyond my abilities, so I didn't go for it. There's also the obstacle of your optimal firing range being too far away to reasonably get to your opponent and kick in time. So I'm going to let myself go here because I think that there's a conflict between kicking and performing the standard functions of the build. And the reason for maintaining the distance is safety, and so that you can also react to the more dangerous things like bazookas, like grenade launchers, and you can jump or you can leap out of the way. This is to say that during the entire match you are doing very minor trigonometry to decide the best jump angle to put yourself in the optimal range relative to your opponent's momentum. As you can see, the ALULA jump with the KASUAR legs is quite far, which means that if your opponent is approaching you, sometimes you can jump towards them and trade places. And then, because you've traded places, you're still the optimal distance away from one another, and you can continue firing and shooting your missiles. And then, once you've done a couple side hops to the left and to the right and back, and they realize they've been tricked, then you can jump forward again. The counter to this would be someone flying over you with like a Gridwalker booster or something, and firing down with an area of effect attack, songbirds, earshots, what have you. But you can go over those because you have a jump. Bazookas may present a problem here, but they present a problem everywhere. And anything that does the beeping warning sound effect with the red squares indicating where it's coming from, you should be able to dodge well above it using the ALULA booster's quick boost in the air. This is still an extremely lightweight build, and it will move well in the air. I contemplated and attempted to use many melee weapons, but in the end I decided it was too dangerous to ever be within melee range for most opponents, And even operating at these distances with as much attitude stability as I could scrape together, I am still incredibly fragile. I'm not going to pretend like this is particularly difficult, because it's not, all in all, but you do kind of have to manage your spacing a lot more than with other builds I've used. I am leaning very heavily on this FCS at a range that these guns are just perfectly tuned to work in, and then I can apply positional pressure with my active homing missile. This is not meta by any means, but it is a fun way that I found to use the KASUAR legs. To be honest, I wasn't really seeing a lot of people use these on their AC, so I didn't have a lot to go off of. One person used a Celis, and then a Curtis with a Zimmerman and a melee weapon and some standard furlong missiles, and that looked pretty good. And then they just used terminal armor in the event they ever got staggered. You will be faster than most builds, and thus able to escape most dangerous situations by moving away. However, you have to be conscious of the confines of the space you're in. So you need to be able to trade places with your opponent by getting them to approach you before you hit the wall of the arena. And then I did use it in many a team game, and I still do, because I like I said, prefer the team format in its chaos. Let's talk about team strategy for a minute, because there's some nuance, there's some subtlety, and there are some rules that you can follow to achieve victory more often than not. I won't pretend that it isn't also mindless gun mashing, because it is. You don't have to know anything about your teammates, you don't have to know anything about your opponents. You just have to know one thing: whose bar is the closest to red. Now, in the initial team fighting phase before either party has initiated, this is a very brief period. One player on each team is going to take damage first. And that should be like sharks to blood in the water. If no one has done this yet, you yourself can pick the most likely target to stagger, and this would require you to know something about your opponent's team. Fortunately, you don't have to look at each of their builds individually, because you can get a good idea for who is most likely to stagger by looking at the parts of each player's AC in the pre-round dramatic shot of all three of you. So once you've chosen the sucker who's playing the lightweight, me, or some other biped player who is the most likely person to stagger, then you personally can attempt to hunt them down and isolate them as a likely target to stagger by shooting at them. If your teammates pick up on this and you get that kill, well, now you're up 3-2, and it doesn't really matter who you start shooting at next in that situation. You can make very small target prioritization switches mid-game in the moment, because if you crack someone's terminal armor and your missiles just come off cooldown, you can turn and put those missiles on a different opponent and then turn back and start shooting at the person with the terminal armor, because they're at 1 HP. It's gonna take nothing from you to kill them. Now, if someone has used their pulse armor and you really need them to die, then perhaps spending all of your resources on them to make sure that they die is more important than turning to a naked target. And when I say naked, I mean you can attack their AP directly, which is another fun invisible stat you can monitor, AP damage per second as opposed to just raw DPS. How is your target prioritization in conjunction with your FCS maximizing target armor point damage over time? You don't really need to be in a lobby with players to figure this kind of stuff out. It's sort of intuitive and baked into the systems of the game very neatly, in a way that I feel was thought out. They really did do a good job with that first patch, and this next one that just came up, the 1.04, is also excellent, so I'm going to have to do some duels and some team games in this new patch, and we'll see how it works. If there's one problem that the Knock Dry Her Arm variant of this build has, it's that you're going to miss some shots to recoil when you're firing continuously. Although the recoil on both of these weapons isn't terrible, it is still there and it is somewhat noticeable. And if you are using target assist, like I am here, or against faster opponents, that'll be even worse. I've been messing around with the MELANDER C3 arms, and I've been thinking about switching the plasma missiles for maybe those twin cell pincer furlong missiles that I like a lot. And then I know everyone uses the double active homing missiles, but I mean, it wouldn't hurt to slot that in as well because the build can handle it. And now I will do something else unusual, and I will ask you all, you viewer, yes you there, sitting, or standing, or running, I don't know your life, I'm sorry. Have you ever tried to use these KASUAR legs, and have you had any success with them? And if you have had success with them, what did you do to do it? Did you use energy weapons? Did you make it a missile boat? Is it like a Huxley orbiter, quadruple trigger build? What is it? I'm fully conscious of the fact that this is probably not the most optimal way to be doing this, but the alternatives seem like either things I've done before or playstyles I'm not wholly interested in doing. So go ahead and take me out of full screen if I am, and scroll on down and type in the comment section below. Type what you did with the KASUAR legs, because I really do actually kind of want to know, because like I said, there wasn't a whole lot for me to go off of. So if anyone else figured it out in the meantime on this new patch, I would honestly like to know. Maybe it is more practical to find a decent stagger combination like the Curtis and the Zimmerman, and then go in for melee attacks with the Basho arms. I could see that working. Admittedly, tricky to use effectively and pull off, but I could see it working. But I think at present I'm going to continue to try to find the best way to double trigger this. Preferably using Boss or Arquebus weapons. But the ETSUJIN and the RANSETSU work together very splendidly. They have a very thrusting sword and dagger feel to them, where you have a lot of range on the RANSETSU and a lot of burst stagger on it, and then on the ETSUJIN you get sustained stagger buildup. So I do like that they are contrasting and complementary. Same with the missiles. The plasma missiles are relatively instantaneous, whereas the slow active homing missile is just a constant threat. And hopefully I can incorporate some kicks when I get these staggers. But that'll be all from me on this. Take care, everyone. Thank you for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. And if you're feeling particularly brave, maybe give this assembly a try.